Hello, everybody. My name is Joshua Delgado, and I will be discussing the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis and its lasting impacts on healthcare. This study is widely recognized as one of the most unethical medical experiments in U.S. history. I will walk through the timeline and then connect ethical, legal, societal, cultural, and policy implications using research-based evidence. Tuskegee study timeline. In 1932, the studies began with 600 African American men, many of whom were never told they had syphilis and were of poor economic status. In the 1930s and 40s, researchers misled participants and tracked the natural progression of the disease without treating them. In 1947, penicillin then became the standard treatment for syphilis, but this was intentionally withheld by the researchers, unfortunately. In the 1950s and 1960s, the untreated tracking continued. Now, this withholding of the treatment was contributed to the preventable suffering and death of these patients. We then see that in 1972, the media exposed the situation. In 1973, a lawsuit was filed that eventually won. In 1997, a formal apology was given by Bill Clinton. This presentation will focus on 5 key areas, all supported by research. The first is ethical violations. The second is legal issues. The third is societal impact. The fourth is cultural competency. And the fifth is policy reforms. Each section is going to build on itself on the previous one to then show how one ethical study reshaped modern healthcare in many different practices. Analyzing the ethical issues and principles, we see that the Tuskegee study violated all major ethical principles in healthcare. According to Miranda and Sanchez in 2014, participants were not given informed consent, meaning their autonomy was completely ignored. Researchers then actively deceived participants and withheld treatment, violating beneficence and non-maleficence. Once penicillin became available, the researchers had then an obligation to treat patients, but they chose not to, causing absolute direct harm. The principle of justice was also violated, as we see African American men were unfairly selected and exploited during the study. The source then emphasizes these principles: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. 4 principles that we see are absolutely still foundational in healthcare today. This is why taking accountability for healthcare professionals is absolutely essential to maintaining the patient-trust relationship. Legally, we see that the Tuskegee study demonstrated clearly the medical negligence. Levine et al. In 2012 explained that researchers failed their legal duty to treat participants, even when treatment was required by law. Now, we all know that there are 4 elements of negligence that are present: the duty to care for the patients, the breach of that duty, the harm caused, and the damages, including death. The withholding of the penicillin, which was widely available, directly violated patient rights. And we see that this case ended up helping drive major legal reforms that strengthen patient protections and research accountability. Now, let's look at the societal impacts. The Tuskegee study has long-lasting societal effects beyond the participants themselves. According to Aslan, Wanamaker, and Hardman in 2020, we see that this study ended up causing generational trauma, which is also known as peripheral trauma. After the study was exposed, African American men slowly started to show significantly reduced trust in the healthcare system. This then, as you can see, led to lower vaccination status, healthcare utilizations, and from the result of that, we see that the mortality rates and the life expectancies had an inverse relationship. We see mortality rates increase, life expectancy decrease. just in African American men. Let's now look at the cultural competency issues that arise during this case. The Tuskegee study is now seen as a symbol of medical mistrust and deception. We see that there is a relationship between medical deception and increased distrust being the problem, and we try to look for solutions to then resolve said problems. Now, Sharaf et al. 2010 explains that the history contributes to the ongoing distrust in healthcare, especially among African American communities. Now, this mistrust is often linked to poor communication and a lack of cultural understanding. So, in order to improve this, it's important that healthcare providers must communicate respectfully and also acknowledge the historical injustices that have happened in this nation. This will then ideally lead to building relationships that last longer and are rooted in trust. Having cultural competency is absolutely essential to addressing disparities that we see in healthcare and then improving patient outcomes every single day. Moving on to the healthcare policies that we see, the Tuskegee study led to major policy changes that still impact healthcare today. We learned that the National Research Act of 1974 was created in response to public outrage. This law then established oversight systems, which included the Institutional Review Boards, or as most people know them, IRBs. According to Spelsey and Buse in 2021, the IRBs ensure that informed consent, minimizing risks, and monitoring research practices were all being executed and enforced. We also learned that the Belmont Report further established 3 core principles. The first was respect for persons, the second was beneficence, the third was justice. Adams and Miller in 2014 emphasized that these principles directly address the failures seen in the Tuskegee study. We also see that these policies now protect future patients and ensure that ethical research practices are being followed and being held accountable for each different colleague. Now, this may be a legal course, but I do want to express the spiritual and just the relational aspects that tie into this. I know Professor Smith had shared an interesting take on whatever you want to do and address in healthcare. Follow your gut, and also just think what's the right thing to do at the end of the day. And so I couldn't agree with that more. And for me, I personally found that truth in Galatians chapter 1, verses 10 in the Bible. You see that it says, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I still trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Now, this is interesting because I believe that this is a morally right truth that we see here. And we understand that there are institutions that are in place to then try to defend this and uphold this. We see it was written thousands of years ago. So with that, it almost serves a reminder that ethical decisions that we have are not just for patients, it's also for life. And I just want to share that with you guys. And so I pray you guys have a great day. God bless.